everyone. It's Friday. Welcome to Litvak Leadership Live. My name is Sean Litvak, and I am here with another one of my brothers from another mother. Yes, he is a fraternity brother of mine, but from across the country. Let me introduce you to Jamie Cohen. Jamie, how you doing this day?
I'm doing great, Sean. I know just before we went live, we were talking about how I know maybe 5 songs on guitar, and one of them kind of matches your countdown music. So I was practicing while the timer was going off. So I am grooving.
So you were like, doing chords and things like that.
Just a simple upstrum. Din, 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 din.
I like
We're
it.
good.
I like it.
Yeah.
It sets a tone because you're on the West Coast, but I'm on the East Coast, although it's Louisville, Kentucky, but it's East Coast time. So it's the East Coast. Yeah. And here it's the end of the day, Friday, it's 4:00, or if you stop at 5, but you get the idea. And it's a nice little groove to move into the weekend. So
totally.
So Jamie, you told me something super interesting right before we hopped on. And I think that it's a real leadership development question. And everyone, if you got questions for Jamie, ask him a question, or you can go to his website, which is flourishing and ready for people very soon. Oh, we got some guests already. Randy Chafee from Building Wins is here. Robert Brooker, the professional commentator, is here. So I know we'll be getting a lot of comments. It's all good. Great. So Jamie, you had told me that it took you, and I didn't write it down, but I'm going to say 12 years to get your undergrad, and then 2 years to get 2 master's degrees. So what I want to know is, not the story behind it, but what changed? What changed so dramatically that it took you 2 years to get 1 degree, and then you got 2 advanced degrees in 2 years?
Yeah. So what changed, I think, was a couple of things. One was at first, so the timeline's right. It took about 10 years to get my bachelor's degree. Once I got out in the professional world, I realized I wanted some more education, went back to school and got 2 masters in 2 years. And the reason why that took so long is I kind of went from external motivations, right? They call it extrinsic motivation, to intrinsic motivation. When I was in my senior year of high school, I actually graduated early. I took some community college courses, tested out. So while my friends were doing their senior year and senior prom and senioritis, I actually was working at a local bank branch 2 blocks from my high school and getting really involved in youth group stuff. I wasn't sure what path was out there for me. I knew a lot of my friends were applying for 4-year universities. They were taking SAT courses. They were doing that kind of stuff. I was really involved in community leadership. I was involved in a youth group. I was working at summer camps. I was working part-time at a bank downtown, just trying to figure out what made me tick. So when I turned 18, my friends had gotten into university. They moved down to Southern California. What 18-year-old doesn't want to move down to sunny Southern California if your buddy says he has an extra room? I went to my bank manager. I said, is there a branch in San Diego you can transfer me to? He said, yeah, here it is. I was lucky enough to do that. Went down there, lived with friends doing their college thing. And while I was there, again, I still kind of took 1 or 2 community college courses, wasn't sure what was going on for me. And then over that time, just the people I met, a lot of fraternity brothers who I met, a girlfriend had at the time, really impacted me in a way that made me value education for its sake, not just as a stepping stone. Okay, get a job, get a high school, college, job, home, kids, whatever, actually to value education. And once I kind of learned to see them, like to enjoy learning, like the actual act of learning, I really dove into it. I went to University of California, San Diego for a couple years. Originally just went there to study computer science because that's what people from Northern California, Silicon Valley were doing at the time.
Yeah.
1 or 2 classes here. Okay, I'm learning a bit here and there. Took a philosophy class. Just again, kind of fell in love with education, the process of learning, the ability for communication to lead to insight. And once these kind of pieces fell in line for me, I really started to take education more seriously. I quit my job. I did the whole student loan thing, dove into school, loved it, finished school, came back up here to the Bay Area and just jumped into the working world. And so after undergrad, I ended up working for my family business, which was a really unique experience. just a small business that makes folding guitars that fold in half and fit in a backpack. And
Oh, wow.
we were in the Bay Area at the time of .coms and software and apps coming up, and it was hard to be a hardware company in the world of software here. And I kind of looked around and said, okay, I'm feeling really professionally motivated. I'm learning about small business in the Bay Area. I'm learning about international supply chains, that kind of thing. But I wasn't fulfilled. My educational drive that I had developed the previous years wasn't being fulfilled, right? The ability to communicate and learn with other people and impact other people directly wasn't being fulfilled. So I looked around. I noticed the high school youth group that I was a part of a decade before was just looking for some weekend staffers. They just needed, a male person to kind of come and just be in a bunk with some teens. I said, okay, I'm here. I'll do it. I went in. I had an amazing time. I connected with the staff. I connected with the teenagers. It was very spiritually fulfilling. It was very personally fulfilling to connect with them. And I realized that I wanted to shift gears and get into leadership and kind of learn how communication can change lives and impact people. I found the graduate program that I told you about earlier. It was a dual master's program at the University of Southern California and at Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. Went down there, had an amazing time. I gave it my all. I went all in. I moved to Los Angeles to be a student, to be a professional student. I think we said earlier that I described it as a professional sandbox when you're in graduate school.
You did.
Right. You're there with your peers and colleagues and internships, and you really get to experiment with who your professional self is going to be. So I'm sure that's a lot longer answer than what you wanted, but that's kind of my educational journey in a nutshell.
Jamie is.
Yeah. So appreciate that.
So now that we've got the flavor of Jamie, explain to me. You said something in the middle of all that intrigued me the moment you said it. You said communication leads to insight. Build upon that. Sure.
I think at the very core, if you try and kind of break down the word, communicate, it's getting the message across from one person to another. I think that conversation is the best tool that we have to create understanding. You have conversation and exposure. And I think when you're exposed to something, you're seeing it from the outside. When you're having a communication is two-way. Okay, there's listening, there's input, and there's output. And when you're just exposed to something, you're witnessing it. When you're communicating with it, when you're in partnership, you're in conversation with it. It brings you closer, right? It actually draws you in to whatever we happen to be talking about that you're trying to gain insight to, whether it's a different community, a new organization, a difficult topic, anything. Sure. I think clear conversation, clear communication are the keys for insight.
So I took my glasses off, so I have to read it over here. Public speaker, storyteller, collaborator, and media strategist. What I want to know, because you're obviously an extrovert, right?
Yeah, guilty as charged. I took the what is it called? The MyersBriggs Test. That's right. Yeah. I'm an ENFJ/P. I'm a super extrovert.
You're an ENFJ/P. Okay, which is why we're like a little bit rustling in the conversation, because I like it, because I am an ENTJ. And I don't know my slash because that's a new thing, but I have learned to be more moderated in my extroversion, but with you, it's just coming out. When you say communication and exposure leads to understanding, now we're both men of faith. We've both been involved in different faith projects over the years from you and I talking. I know that already. So what I want to know is, how do you, as an extrovert, calm yourself down to hear from God?
Sure. So I have a personal meditative practice, which was very difficult to get into and took me a long time to get into. I'm actually going to rewind from that. So I grew up with a stutter. right? I had a stutter that kind of came
Shut
out as
up!
a
I was in
slur.
speech
That's right.
therapying for years with a
Okay, there you
stutter.
go. Hey, that's right, brother from another mother. You said it.
You got
So,
it.
so I was born in Philly on the East Coast. When you had a stutter, they just made fun of you on the school bus, and that was your life. But I moved
Yeah.
out here to the San Francisco Bay Area, where they took the kid with the stutter and put him in speech therapy. And one of
Yeah.
the first things they did was they had me slow down my talking and thinking by teaching what was then called a body scan. And now it's kind of in every meditation app, they teach you a body scan. So it's like you chill for a second, you check, I kind of imagine like a 3D scanner going from head to toe, kind of checking
Okay.
like every bone and appendage on the way down. And taking the time to do that kind of slows down my thoughts a little bit. And I've held on to that practice for however many years it's been now. So that's at least helped me slow my thoughts to let something else in. If you want to talk about God or insight or silence, that actually leads me to another concept I actually wrote in a note that I wanted to talk about with you today, because it's a concept that I find really helpful in leadership, in group communication, and also just like in personal space for some holiness and sanctimony in your own life. For those of your viewers who are familiar with Kabbalah, it's like Jewish mysticism.
Yeah.
These mystical texts about the creation and the existence of God and all this kind of stuff. There's this concept there that says, in the beginning, right there, God was just everything and everywhere. He was taking up all of creation. It was taking up all of creation. And in order for creation to happen, God had to withdraw into himself. And that concept is an onomatopoeia called tzimtzum. That's the sound of God withdrawing into himself. Tzimtzum. And the space that was created when God withdrew into himself, that tzimtzum, that space is now occupied by creation, by the universe, by the solar system, by existence. Okay. And so what I really try and do is I come out with my extroverted self, and I notice that I need to kind of take a step back, and I tell myself, step back into myself.
Interesting.
And so I will create, I fill a space by being in it, by being myself, and I'll pause for a moment, withdraw a little bit, and see what fills that void. And if it's other people in a team, then they feel comfortable knowing I filled that space. They don't feel pressured to fill it, but I've stepped back, so that's there. If it's my personal spiritual practice, I fill up my whole day, but I step back. I step back. I save some time. I withdraw some mental energy and kind of let whatever thoughts and spirituality want to flow into me flow in. So I just kind of carry around this mental tool of tzimtzum and remind myself that it's okay to withdraw a little bit, because that kind of creates the space for something else, something magical to happen potentially.
Well, and what I have found, one, stuttering occurs because those of us who do stutter are trying to talk as fast as we think.
Yeah.
And we need to realize that we will never speak as fast as we think. So we need to slow down. That's one. Yeah. Two, when you talk about, I know what Kabbalah is, heard of Anapata Maria, if I'm pronouncing it right. Tzimtzum, I thought, was an Asian Eastern mysticism type thing, cool. but it may have its origins in Kabbalah for all that. But what I'm getting to is that I know that any leader, to be a complete leader, it's mind, will, and emotion and spirit. It's not just the physical, but it's the supernatural also. And to be able to quiet oneself down, to be able to hear from God, because you tell me, do you hear from God when you're busy, going, or is it when you slow down and you're quiet?
Oh man. First, I don't want to be super misleading here. I think when I use the word God, every few years I redefine it for myself, whatever that is, right? Whether it is the traditional biblical God, whether it is, the motivating force that drives human ingenuity,
Okay.
Whether it's the feeling of frisson I get with other people in a pure human moment. So those, my definitions of God have changed throughout my life, but that feeling you feel inside, right, that spark of life and inspiration, that happens when you slow down. It motivates me to then turn around and be busy, and kind of it's something that kind of used to kind of check in as like a waypoint on my whatever personal professional journeys. You slow down for
Right.
a moment, you try and listen to yourself, to the voices in your head, to whatever voice of inspiration you're getting. Say, am I on the right path? Is this, good for me, for my loved ones, whatever? Am I doing what I hold myself to do? Am I being the person I see myself as in my head? And only when I think I slow down can I check that. But if you're just sitting there listening all the time, you're not doing, right? So it's about kind of, I think,
Gotta
finding
do.
that balance, right? You get the inspiration, and then you need action, right?
There is a balance between taking action all the time, but
Yeah.
sometimes taking action is sitting down with a pad of paper or at your keyboard or whatever, and just being quiet and memorializing, writing, typing what you hear, and then reading it afterwards. So you are a storyteller.
Yeah.
What is that? How do
What
you
is that?
define being a storyteller? Tell us how that fits into your leadership cadence.
Sure. So this is where my inner philosopher comes out. I think everything is stories. There's the stories we tell ourselves in our head about who we are. There's the stories we tell ourselves in our head about where we're going to go. When you, like I said earlier, are exposed to a new, whether it's concept or community or people, what you're learning is stories, right? We've decided that the modern story is this thing called whatever Facebook, right? It's try and tell the story of Facebook to somebody 50 years ago. You have about 100 stories you have to tell them to get there. I think being a storyteller is just being able to describe a journey from beginning, middle to end, to create mutual understanding. And human beings, I think, really connect. Right? You said earlier something about like the will, the physical, the spiritual. You can kind of connect all those points through a really, really good human story.
So, what is the purpose of storytelling from your perspective?
Yeah. Again, I think it's the best tool we have for creating understanding. Story hits. It hits every emotional and intellectual point. It can create connection. It can create understanding. You can. I find that kind of in the same way that a certain musical note can kind of tap into a certain feeling, a really good story arc, a really good moment along someone's journey can kind of tap into inner feelings and helps you identify with somebody else. Does that make sense?
It makes great sense. It makes great sense. So then how do you blend that, ducktail it, whatever, into your role at the Film Institute, which is, the ultimate in storytelling, I would think, at a certain level.
Correct. So I have the fun challenge professionally of telling stories about storytellers, or telling stories about stories.
Okay.
And, if we're talking about so I'm the marketing and communications manager. If you're talking about just marketing a film, right? How do you sell a story? You have to tell the story about the story. You have to kind of tell a mini story to pull someone in and get them interested in the full story. If you're talking about how do we discuss internal strategies, right? There's this kind of saying in sales and marketing called the customer journey, right? What is the customer journey? Is none other than the story of somebody who interacts with your company, your organization, your business, your store, right? And you really need to put yourself in that person's shoes, live out their story for a day, a minute, a moment on your website, whatever that is. And you need to make sure it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And when you follow that journey, when you tell that story of that customer, of that patron, of that client. It helps you, I think, understand what their needs are and what you need to do to meet those needs. You tell their story, you find the roadblocks along the way. You tell their story, you find the forks that they have to reach in their path. You can tell their story about how you want them to interact with your story, right? At what point in a customer's journey do you want them to learn X, Y, and Z about you or about your organization, right? There's a lot that you can do with storytelling in a professional setting.
So when you look at storytelling, I mean, anyone who is a regular viewer or sometime viewer of Litvak Leadership Live knows that I've been working on a book for quite some time. And the book is done, basically. It's 56,000 words.
Nice.
And what I've been told from multiple sources is that it's really multiple books, not one. And what I need to do to it, to break it down further, is to add stories, because the information that I've written down, I've gotten great compliments on. It's kind of my life experience manifesto. Maybe that'll be a good title. I don't know.
Cool.
But the storytelling part is something that I struggle with. I'm great at telling stories about other people or what's happened with them. But when it comes to telling stories from my own life, and the reason I bring this up is I'm sure other people struggle with this too, about things that are meaningful from them, to be personally vulnerable is very difficult. And as an extrovert, for all you introverts out there saying, what are you talking about? Yeah, welcome to the extrovert life. Put me in front of a huge group, talk forever. Have to go one-on-one and be vulnerable. Incredibly difficult. Look at Jamie nodding. He understands. So what advice do you have from your extensive storytelling background as to how people like myself can shed the vulnerability and actually provide their story? Yeah, I'll stop the sentence there.
No, that's a great question. I'm actually gonna, I think, kind of throw one a little bit back at you. You had told me before we went live that you really enjoyed math when you were younger and you were really good at math. And I'm gonna go ahead and guess that you were really, really good with the equations and with the numbers themselves. And when it came time for the word problems, you were the guy that probably wrote the equation above the word problem just to make sure that you pulled the numbers out right. Am I close to hitting the mark here? Yeah, right. So I think kind of what you need to do is reverse engineer it. Take your equation, say, here's the information, but you need to kind of go one step back. How did I arrive at this information, right? How did I get the second variable? Here was a major turning point. How did I get to that turning point? Here's this insight I had. How did I get to that insight? I think vulnerability in storytelling and leadership comes from, hey, I was at a place of ignorance. Here was ignorant me X number of experiences ago. I had experience A, B, C, and I arrived to this new place, and now you have this information too. You can hopefully learn from my story. Does that make sense?
It does, but I think where I was going with it, and that's a great answer. Don't get me wrong. Where I was going with it is, I think like many extroverts, it's getting over the sharing of, we can overshare as extroverts, but are we actually sharing something that is within our core, that is deeply personal? How does an extrovert do that? Because I think the best storytellers are sharing deeply personal core items. How have you coached people to do that?
Yeah. I think first is to remember that the deeply personal is actually deeply universal, right? The human experience, capital P, capital H, capital E. There you go. The human experience, right? We all we think it's very unique, but actually the human story has been told millions of times over again. It's just remembering that that your deepest thing, there's sometimes it's the fear of truth. Sometimes the fear of exposing too much, right? Sometimes as extroverts, we're trying to keep the energy up here. Okay, I'm telling the story of this thing. Here was a sad moment, but now we did here, and I learned this lesson, and here I am. And I think it's okay to kind of pause and breathe in that heart space for a second, and the emotional thing, because that vulnerability actually creates connection. right? It's fun to
Okay.
tell a snazzy story and be entertaining and be engaging, but to be really vulnerable, just to pause in the difficulty and the muck for a second, I think people can identify with that. Now, how you actually do it, you'll notice in one of my, I think, professional identities there, I put something about a public speaking coach and an improviser, because I think being able to take on a role with some emotional distance creates the safety to kind of bridge that gap, right? Does that make sense? Public speaker, storyteller, right? So I have a lot of experience in improv and improv theater, and I'm working in teams and groups. I think one of the best things you can do is role play. And even if you're a solo author, you're role playing against the masters who you compare yourself to. You're role playing
Sure.
against your inner editor, your inner critique, right? You're role playing against whatever the chapter you read to your wife at night, right? And I think what you can do is put a little bit of emotional distance between yourself and that story and pretend like you're playing the role of yourself in that story. Say, okay, that was, Sean A had that experience. I'm going to come in as Sean B, and what would Sean B do in that person's in his place, right? And if you throw some role play into it, that allows you to feel like, okay, it's safe. It's not me feeling that. I'm playing somebody who's feeling that. I'm playing my former self as a role. And the more you do that, the more comfortable you get, kind of uncovering the truth of how you felt in that experience in that moment.
Interesting. So when you're working in improv, because you said you work in improv,
Yeah.
do you use that philosophical approach during improv?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most famous improv books of all time is called Truth in Comedy, right?
Okay.
You if the story isn't real, it's not going to be fun, nothing to connect to, right? The audience isn't going to connect to the moment. There might be a slapstick, forgettable moment, but if there's a true, vulnerable moment that's then turned with some comedic timing, people see through that, right? There's a reason why the Peabody Awards came out yesterday, and you have comics, right? Professional comedians winning journalism awards, right? Because they're able to tell the story of what's happening with a little bit of levity, but also with
Sure.
some earnestness, with some role play in it, right? That's why you have John Oliver and Stephen Colbert, who are dominating these late night spheres over actual journalists and news people, because they're able to tell the story of what's happening. They're able to place the news of the day into some context, right?
Interesting. So what drew you, other than the extroverted pursuit of ego,
Yeah,
into improv?
sure. Besides the look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. Yeah. It was so I think I said before, I can't really draw. I can play about 3 songs on guitar.
Yeah.
I can't sing, but I'm really good at thinking on my feet. And again, we mentioned earlier about how I had a tough time with the traditional academic journey. And when you're an extrovert with ants in your pants in high school, they tend to either shuffle you out of school or shuffle you into the drama class. And that
Yeah.
became a safe space to get the ants in your pants out, to think on my feet quickly, to kind of experiment with groupthink, with positive groupthink, right? Learning subtle cues from other people and responding to those. And again, it's one of those safe spaces to play. You can kind of inhabit a role or a character, see how you feel in that, and say, oh, I actually like that. I'm going to try and bring that into my real self and actually connect with that character kind of internally throughout the rest of my day or rest of my life, whatever it happens to be.
So when you look back on your time
Mm-hmm.
in AEPI,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone is told when we're in the fraternity that you're developing lifelong relationships,
Yeah.
that you will meet people from wherever, but these are your brothers. You will know them. And did you ever really think that it would go beyond your initial chapter? I mean, I have a friend in Louisville that when we're in the same room, and if one of us introduces the other, he went to New York State, I think it was. We introduce each other always as my brother from another mother, and people who don't know why we're saying that inevitably ask us. I mean, what value have you seen, whether it be in fraternity, and I think it transfers to other associations? Tell us about what you think of people being involved in either fraternities, associations, something else like that.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to go back to story, right? We connected because we had a similar stop in our personal stories, right? If I say a pie, that's all you need to say, right? You already know that part of my story, right? You already know what I went through, the brotherhood that I had at formative years in my life, and you already said, oh, the fact you carry forward forever, that's happened. I've been to weddings and brisses and baby namings of people that I met when we were 18, 19, 20 years old, and we were kids ourselves.
Right.
And I think there's something powerful about having shared experiences, which are really just, hey, we have similar chapters in our books of our lives, and you can kind of connect and identify. Just say, hey, I understand that part of your story. You understand that part of mine. We're now connected because our chapters overlap. And you can use that just to create understanding between two people. You can use that for a professional connection like this. You can use that if you meet someone at a party just for a personal connection, but you instantly feel more connected to someone when you know on a deep level that part of their story.
Yeah, it really surprises me. I had shared with you before we went online that although I was raised as a Jew and applied to rabbinic school at one point, I'm now a Christian, and everyone who watches this knows that, my background. But I went to one of our chapter reunions one time after I had become a Christian, and I was a little bit concerned because I didn't know how people would accept me. And it was just normal. We were just all cutting up, and I turned to one guy, and he looked at me. He goes, "What?" I go, "I'm just kind of overwhelmed by how everyone is still accepting me, although I don't practice Judaism anymore." And he looked at me. He goes, "Well, we're brothers still, aren't we?" So, and I don't know if everyone gets that, to be able to have an association in their life. In our case, it's a fraternity where it transcends all of that, that there is that connection about parts of our lives.
Yeah. And Sean, I just want to say to you, I mean, I don't think anyone is at the same place in their spiritual or religious journey as they were when they're 18, 19, 20 years old. I have brothers I have brothers who've personally gone way more religious, less religious, kind of still at the same level of just, I do Shabbat at the Chabad house and that's about it. But that's not how we judged each other, how we connected to each other in the first place. We connected because we had similar stories in our ancestry, or our parents had a similar story that they kind of forced on us, and we connected in college because of a last name or something. But then we wrote that chapter of our stories together, and that chapter is set in stone. It's not going anywhere, right? You had that experience already with your brothers.
It's a great experience. So back to leadership for a moment.
Yeah.
Did you ever think that 5 years ago that we would have gone through a global pandemic and your film skills would be so in demand on a daily basis?
Yeah, I did not know at the time that my interests of art and culture and technology and community were all going to be so useful at the same time. A lot of things fell in place at the right time. I got my role at the Jewish Film Institute about 1.5 years before the pandemic. So I had kind of like one glimpse of the life cycle of full in-person, tens of thousands of people, multiple theaters, multiple cities, kind of the frenetic energy of running in-person film festival. Then to everything being shut down. And my affinity for technology and leadership allowed me to kind of push and pull not only our organization and institute into the digital realm, but also audiences into the digital realm. And that was kind of a fun challenge, sometimes a little more difficult than I would have thought it would have been. But I think you have to look at the silver lining in everything. Some people said 2020 was the worst year of their life. I know people who had babies, who started businesses, who went back to school, who learned new skills.
Absolutely.
And I'm not saying if you didn't do any of that, you're some sort of a failure or whatever. It was incredibly mentally and emotionally taxing to kind of be during the pandemic. But some people were able to kind of spin that into, into one of the best years of their lives. I personally had some amazing moments during the pandemic, also some incredible challenges. But being able to use my skills to pivot my organization and our followers and fans to a new space that's now here permanently to stay, right? We're living in a hybrid world now, right?
We
You don't
are
have to
living
tell
in
me,
a hybrid world.
right? You don't have to tell me what a ring light is, right? We all know what it is now. We all know what a ring light is, right? Right? We all know what screen share means, right? These are stories now that we're all familiar with, right? Zoom is a word at the dinner table now, right? Zoom is part of the American story forever now.
It is amazing. The number of people that during the pandemic initially are like, well, I'm just going to wait for things to get back to normal. I'm going to kind of coast. I felt bad for them because, like you said, everyone had some level of challenge during it. Yeah. But I guess the people that I ended up associating most with during the pandemic were people that were striving and thriving and saying, I'm not going to let something like this get in the way of my success. If I'm not going to have the normal physical manifestation of success, then I'm going to grow personally and come out of this stronger. And when you start associating with people like that, you meet even more people like that. I think that's part of leadership, looking for those folks that you can learn something from. And at the same time, you don't even realize what you're teaching them.
I completely agree. I had lost my my train of thought there for a second, but I was gonna say that's they say that like you're the average of the 5 people you interact with the most, and if you're interacting with people who are only, well, this is a challenge, I don't know, versus people who are saying, look, this is an obstacle that I get to now face and deal with and overcome. I knew what I was gonna say before, is that one part about leadership is you have to be creative. And I think that creativity, when there's a lot of space and it's unrestrained and there's no limits, is actually kind of bad for creativity. Creativity does really well when it's constrained, when it's challenged. When you say, okay, we need to bring 40,000 moviegoers who are used to seeing these big films and these historic theaters across the state. How do we bring them into, how do we bring ourselves into their living rooms, right? That was a fun challenge. We were constrained with the rules of people's personal technology limitations a year ago, with institutional limitations. And using those constraints, we became more creative. We actually improved as an organization. We actually ended up making more money for the virtual festivals we threw. We got more audience members engaged across the world, right? Not just in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so with those constraints, we were forced to become more creative. Like give someone a box and we'll think outside it, right? If there is no box, nothing to think outside of. And so I think the pandemic was a challenge. It was deadly. It was devastating. I would not want to live through it again. We're still in it, P.S. But the fact that so many people rose to the challenges, were able to think outside the box of the constraints of the pandemic, is a testament to human ingenuity, for sure.
And so when you look at the arts, film specifically, and I look at Netflix, which we ended up canceling because it just bored us. We're thinking about getting rid of Amazon Prime because until there's enough people to do two-day shipping again. Are we really getting what we're paying for? And the video quality just seems to have gone down, which is what leads me to my next question. Do you think that the pandemic, that Hollywood or filmmakers have not responded to the challenge, because so many people had so much time to watch things that it's all become some level of vanilla and nothing is really jumping up outside of it? What say you?
What say me? Yeah, I would say part of that is it's a really crowded field. There's so many stories being told out there that we don't. The only ones that rise to the surface are the vanilla ones because they're the least offensive. They're the least exciting. They're the ones that just like, okay, they're palatable for everyone, but they're kind of the lowest common denominator, right? We're all familiar with that phrase, right? The lowest common denominator is probably the least palatable. You really have to dig to find the art that's out there, because it's there. I had a friend the other day ask me, Jamie, what are you doing for new music? And I was like, I don't know. I find other music tastemakers. I find DJs, listen to their music, and then I find the songs they play, and kind of you have to work at finding the art that speaks to you these days, because with the worldwide internet, we're all interconnected. Anyone can make a movie, a song, a video, put it out there in the world, and it may take you who knows how long to find it, to reach an audience. And filmmakers and auteurs are working, they're all marketers. They have to market their own stories and get it out there, get it to your TV, get it onto Netflix, get it onto Amazon Prime, get it onto Vimeo, get it onto the Discover More page of Instagram or TikTok or whatever you're using to take it in. There's so much content out there that you have to really you have to work to find what is interesting to you and what speaks to you. You have to search for the stories that you might engage with.
I think that's a good wrapping up point. Search for the stories to engage with. So, final question.
Yeah.
In all that we've discussed, and for the folks who are watching now, the folks who were on earlier and left, those that'll come back during the replay, from your breadth of experience and your personal focus in life, if you could sum up a way to encourage someone in 3 sentences, what would it be?
A way to encourage someone. I would say to discover your story, your personal story, learn how to tell it, okay, and learn how to listen to others. That's my 3 sentences.
I'm impressed.
That's the improv skill coming through.
Oh, wait, the last one was learn. Oh, and it's so stupid because I knew it said listen. And learn how to listen to others.
Yeah, to others' stories.
That's great. That's great. You were put on the spot and you became very insightful. Not that you weren't to begin with, but you wrapped up well. So, Jamie, thank you so much for being on the show today. Everyone, hey, go to Jamie's website, jamiecohen.net. It's going to just take you to LinkedIn once you click it, but go there once a week for the next month or so. Jamie's building a whole backside to the website where you can find out more about him as a public speaker, a storyteller, a collaborator. What's the other thing? A media strategist. Jamie's got a lot going on. He's a great communicator, ton of experience, and I wholeheartedly endorse him.
Really appreciate that, Sean.
He is my brother. It's been a fun conversation. So that's it this week for Litvak Leadership Live. We'll be back next week with another guest, something patriotic. And that's all I'm going to tell you for now. Have a great weekend, everybody.